Have you ever wondered how people can get so good at old school RuneScape? Is there a particular boss that you simply can't wrap your head around, no matter how much you try? Do you feel like you're missing an important piece of the puzzle that all the high-level players know but you've somehow missed? If so, I think you're gonna learn a lot from this video. I've organized what I consider to be the 10 essential concepts of PVM in old school RuneScape, and I'm going to explain them in as much detail as I can in one video. Now, if there's anything here that you feel needs to be explained more in depth, let me know in the comments below, and I can certainly make another video going into greater detail on a particular topic if needed. Now, this video is assuming you already have a fundamental understanding of old school RuneScape and are familiar with using the RuneLite client, which can be found linked on the old school RuneScape website. With that being said, let's get into it. Controls and hotkeys. RuneScape has always had a simple control scheme since the very beginning. You click to move, you click to attack, you click to eat food, etc. But in the recent years, there have been many additions to quality of life and plugins that give the player significantly more control over the game and their player. Here are a few examples that are often overlooked, but make a huge difference in gameplay. In addition to zooming your camera in and out with the scroll wheel, you can also zoom your minimap in and out by hovering your mouse over the minimap and using your scroll wheel. Now, I personally like to just keep the minimap zoomed out all the way, but maybe you'll have a use for zooming it in as well. It's just a good piece of information to have regardless. You can move the camera around by pressing and holding the middle mouse button and moving your mouse around. You can change this to be right-click in the camera plugin in RuneLite, but I believe it's worth it to just get used to the middle mouse button, as that leaves the right-click as its own function without having to share roles with the camera function. You can also remap arrow keys to WASD for further camera controls with the key remapping plugin. And additionally, you can also remap the F1 through 12 keys to the Arabic number row on your keyboard, from 1 to the plus sign. This makes switching between all your different tabs like Prayer, Inventory, and Spellbook significantly easier in my opinion. Lastly, if you hold the Control key while the run is enabled in your client and you click to move, your character will walk instead of run. The inverse is also true, where if run is disabled in the client and you hold Control and click to move, your character will run instead. Now, this is very useful for various PVM scenarios that require you to walk during certain moments and run in other moments. Understanding ticks. Every single action in RuneScape is calculated on a tick-based system. This means that everything that the game receives as input or calculates as output can only be done in 0.6 second intervals, or 1 tick intervals. You can think of RuneScape as a mailbox that has mail being delivered and received every 0.6 seconds. You can put things in the mailbox between ticks, like clicking a piece of food, but the post worker won't take it until the next game tick, when you will actually eat the food. You also cannot take the mail until it's been delivered every tick, like taking damage for instance. This can be manipulated in many different ways. Prayer manipulation. A very common method of prayer manipulation is one-tick flicking. Now, flicking really isn't as hard as people say it is. The difficult part is just getting the muscle memory down and understanding the timing. To one-tick flick, you first need to turn on the prayer on the first game tick. Then, after the next game tick has started, you will turn the prayer off and then on again within that next tick. You then need to repeat this action of turning the prayer off and on every single tick. This works because the game does not drain prayer on that first game tick that it's turned on. What we're doing here is we're essentially telling the game that every game tick, we just switched our prayer on, which allows us to use any prayer in the game without draining a single prayer point. I recommend practicing one tick flicking while doing Slayer, as it will help you develop the muscle memory to be able to use it effectively in bossing encounters. There is also the ability to do what's called a lazy flick, which essentially means you're only turning the prayer on the game tick that it matters. This can be useful in some situations, like killing Scurious with 0 prayer points, for example, but it can be difficult in its own right, especially if the attack timings change during the fight. It's generally more effective to just learn one tick flicking, as the timing is always going to be the same, regardless of enemy. Food manipulation. Food is commonly manipulated in old-school RuneScape by a method called combo eating. Combo eating is the act of consuming multiple pieces of food, and sometimes a potion dose, on the same game tick. This is done because normally when you eat food in the game, there's a 3-tick or 1.8 second delay before you can attack or eat another piece of food again. Combo eating allows you to eat more food or heal more HP in significantly less time than otherwise possible. In RuneScape, there are 3 different types of consumables. There is standard food, which includes your sharks, anglerfish, manta ray, etc. Potions, like the Prayer Potion, Saradomin Brews, Super Combats, etc. And combo food, which really only consists of karambwans and gnome cooking foods. But most people just use karambwans anyways. Combo eating is done by clicking different types of consumables on the same game tick, allowing you to consume all of them on the next game tick all at once. In order to combo eat food, you need to eat food in this specific order. You go standard food, then potion, then the combo food. You can always skip one of these items, like skipping the potion and just going standard food and then combo food, but you can never go in reverse, so you can't eat a combo food and then drink a potion dose after that. You're going to be missing ticks. I recommend bringing some form of combo food, like sharks and karambwans for example, whenever you're doing any sort of combat, like Slayer tasks. This will teach you the muscle memory of combo eating, so that when it matters, you'll be prepared. This also gives you less downtime from eating food, which in turn will give you more Slayer and combat XP per hour, which is always nice. Mastering movement. In old school, movement is seemingly simple, but in reality can also be manipulated strategically to prevent damage in PVM scenarios. Walking works exactly how you would expect, where once you click on a tile to move to, every game tick your character moves one tile towards that location. Running, however, is a little bit different. When you have run enabled, when you click on a tile to move to, your character will move 2 tiles per tick towards that location. But remember, the game only interprets what's happening every game tick. So on one tick you're on the first tile, and then the next tick you're 2 tiles ahead. This means your character is essentially jumping or teleporting 2 tiles at a time while running, according to the servers. This can be used to your advantage, as any dangerous tiles that you wouldn't want to be walking on can simply be jumped over by running. You can do this by first enabling run, then clicking the tile right next to the tile you want to jump over, and then clicking to move anywhere on the other side of that tile. L movement is another important concept, as your character's pathing is extremely predictable. I personally don't like the term L movement, as it very poorly explains how the character's pathing actually works. I prefer the term straight angle movement, as whenever you click to move to a particular location, Your character will first pick the cardinal direction that will get them closest to the destination. Then, while heading in a cardinal direction, if there is ever a perfect diagonal line to the destination, your character will take it. This is most commonly utilized in the Sodaseg maze for Theater of Blood. However, it can be taken advantage of in other movement-based activities like the Hallowed Sepulchre, for example. Projectile Calculation. There are tons of various different combat scenarios in old school RuneScape, with some of them being created over 20 years ago. Back in the day, every monster operated in essentially the same way, where the damage type and amount would be calculated mostly on the same tick that the attack animation started. This wasn't really an issue for melee attacks. However, this did cause some confusion for longer distance magic or ranged attacks. This is because you would need to be praying against whatever attack is hitting you before the projectile even gets close to you, meaning that the actual projectile in the game itself is more or less irrelevant. There are a few bosses that have a specific animation or audio cue that the boss does to signify which attack they will do. However, the visible projectile itself is still meaningless, like in Jad, the DK bosses, or Dragonfire. This has been changed for some recent boss encounters to where as long as you have the correct prayer enabled before a projectile visibly hits your character, you will be protected. Now this is great, but it does cause quite a stark difference in timing between prayer switches fighting an older boss like the DKs compared to fighting a new boss like the Leviathan. Here is a list of the bosses that use the old projectile calculation system, and here is a list of the bosses that use the new projectile calculation system. This is important to keep in mind because there's not really anything in-game that explains any of this. It's more or less just something that we have to live with playing a 20-year-old video game. The value of prayer. I'm sure you're aware of the basics of prayer in this game, but did you know that they recently made all of the lower level combat prayers useful again? Now even the lowest level combat prayers like Burst of Strength, Mystic Will, and Sharp Eye all have the potential to give you a max hit, while also being able to stay on for over an hour, and in some instances 2 hours, making it essentially free DPS during any activity, and you won't even need a prayer potion. Another thing to consider is how powerful the best prayers are in comparison to gear, like Rigor, Augury, or Piety. If you're killing an Abyssal Demon with just an Abyssal Whip and a Dragon Defender with no other gear, and you just have Piety on, that would be the equivalent of wearing full Torva, an Amulet of Torture, and an Ultor Ring, which is nearly 1 billion GP worth of gear. You tell me what you'd rather use. The value of levels. Your combat stats are just as valuable as the best prayers in the game. Using the same example as before, if you killed an Abyssal Demon with a Whip and a Dragon Defender with level 80 Strength and 80 Attack, while wearing full Torva, an Amulet of Torture, and an Ultor Ring, another person with 99 Attack and 99 Strength, holding just the Abyssal Whip and the Dragon Defender, would actually kill it faster on average than you. Another important thing to note is how valuable having higher defenses is. You're much more likely to enjoy killing a boss that hits you 30% of the time versus a boss that's hitting you nearly 100% of the time due to a lower defense level. Speaking of defenses, keep in mind that 70% of your magic defenses are based on your magic level, while only 30% is based on your defense level. So don't forget to level up your magic as well. GP and gear are temporary. But levels are forever. You only ever have to level them up once, and for the most part, it's free. Can't really get much better than that. Gear switching simplified. Speaking of gear switching is an important part of the late-game PVM experience, and yet many people struggle with switching gear during a combat encounter. One of the biggest issues I've seen is items becoming jumbled up in the inventory, making future switches nearly impossible. To mitigate this issue, when you're planning what gear to bring to a particular boss, try to match all of your switches 1-to-1-to-1. For example, if you need 3 combat styles for a boss, and you're bringing a melee cape and a range cape, you should also bring a mage cape to keep everything tidy. Also, keep in mind that if you're using a 2-handed weapon sometimes, but a 1-handed weapon and a shield at other times, this can also cause these same issues. While learning, you're actually better off just skipping the shield in favor of more accurate switches. In addition to matching switches, it's also important to prioritize what gear to switch. For example, it's almost never worth switching boots, as you'll almost never gain a max hit with anything other than primordial boots for melee. I also like to keep the weapon switches as the first item in the switching pattern. That way I'm a lot less likely to not switch the weapon if I misclick, which is the most important part of the gear switch in the first place. You don't always need an 8-way gear switch, or switching 8 pieces of gear at the same time. Most of the time, you can very easily get away with just a 4 or 6-way switch with little to no loss in DPS. When it comes to gear switching, precision is much more important than speed. Doing a slow 6-way switch during a boss fight is much better than a fast 3-way switch that was supposed to be a 6-way, and now your inventory is completely scrambled for future phases and you forget to switch your prayers and you're dead. Now, my final piece of advice on this topic is, just like with a few of these other topics that I've brought up, I would suggest bringing gear switches to simple Slayer tasks and practicing switching whenever you can. This might be a little less efficient, but it'll work the same way as practicing flicking. It helps you develop that muscle memory for when it matters during a boss encounter. I also want to add a recommendation for the anti-drag plugin, which as a whole just helps switching a lot more, but we'll talk more about plugins a little bit later. Listen to the game. Now, I know most people like to play without the RuneScape music constantly blasting in their ears. Until they go to Port Sarim, of course. But it's nearly essential in a lot of PVM encounters to keep your game sounds on. There is a ton of information that this game presents in the form of audio cues, and without sounds, you're just at a severe disadvantage. Some of these audio cues include an audible sound for Jad's magic attack before the damage is calculated, a notable audio cue for the Nightmare's ranged attack, and the next special attacks with the next Nostalgia plugin.
I demand a blood sacrifice.
Use the Wiki. I am still so surprised at the amount of people I see who never look at the Wiki for this game, even when they're struggling at a specific encounter. There's actually a button in-game on the top right that now allows you to simply click on whatever object or entity you need to know more about, and the game will automatically open up a new browser window with the Wiki page of whatever you clicked on. The Wiki can show you a monster's elemental or combat weakness, different attack patterns, the most effective gear to bring to a specific boss, recommended inventory setups, average drop rates, and so much more. This information is invaluable. Don't sleep on it. Take advantage of plugins. Plugins are a crucial part of the game nowadays, and there are tons of plugins that are extremely useful for PVM that a ton of people know nothing about. Now, I do plan on making a separate video in the future covering all of my favorite plugins and their use cases, but specifically for PVM, I will mention a few here that have changed the way I play the game. Tile indicators and improved tile indicators. This plugin will show you the actual tile, or true tile, your character is standing on, which is often quite ahead of the visual player on screen. This is nearly essential for late-game encounters like the Soda Seg Maze, Vorkath Acid Phase, and Verzik. Visual Metronome. This gives you a visual cue as to when the game ticks are changing, which I personally like to have the indicator above my inventory icon, so that it stays above my prayers while switching. You can move the indicator, or any part of the interface in RuneLite for that matter, by holding Alt and dragging any component to wherever suits you best. To revert its location back to default, you hold Alt and right-click the component. I also like to enable the True Tile overlay on this plugin, which gives me the same visual cue while looking at my player, which helps with bosses like the Leviathan, when looking at your player is essential for timing prayer switches. Anti-drag. Have you ever switched your gear, but instead of equipping it, you just dragged it to another inventory slot? This plugin single-handedly will mitigate this issue for you. It does make reorganizing your inventory more cumbersome, as you need to click and hold whatever item you want to move for a short time before it can actually be relocated, but that's a small price to pay for significantly more accurate gear switches, in my opinion. Monster Menu HP. Have you ever right-clicked a stack of enemies, but you have no idea which one you were actually attacking? This plugin will help show you the health of enemies by the color of their names in the right-click menu. Status bars. This is an essential plugin to more boldly visualize your character's HP and prayer on screen in a sleek way. I honestly can't really play the game without this plugin anymore, as the visual aid is immensely helpful for me in PVM situations. And that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate everyone who took the time, and I hope that you learned something from this. If you have any other PVM tips or tricks to add, please leave a comment to help out anybody else who may not know. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like will go a long way to help my channel grow. And if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button, and I'll be making more content very soon. I'll be going on holiday for a few weeks, but I will have more content for you guys when I get back in the new year. Thanks again, good luck, and take it easy.